Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm TX141, but you may call me Paul, welcoming you to another pair of Ace in a Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the British RAF fighter aircraft known as the Hawker Tempest Mk2, or just Tempest 2, which comes in at a tier of 4 and a battle rating of 6.3. Having already provided a general overview to the history behind the Tempest and the Mark 5 iteration, which you may see using the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, we shall solely focus on the history behind the Tempest 2 today. We begin by realising that the disappointment of the Hawker Typhoon in its intended role of interceptor, especially at higher altitudes, meant that the Hawker design team under Sidney Cam were encouraged to rework the Typhoon design in 1941. The new design, initially known as the Hawker P1012, was quickly dubbed Typhoon 2, featuring improved fuel storage in the fuselage to accommodate a new laminar flow inspired wing design and a new cockpit design. The plane's design was accepted and two prototypes were contracted for production in November of 1941. Yet the significant number of design changes from the original Typhoon meant the plane was quickly renamed the Tempest. The first two prototypes were to feature sub-variants of the Napier Sabre engine, one housing the Mark II iteration as taken directly from the Typhoon, and the other more experimental Mark IV version. The first prototype to fly was HM599, which was to feature the experimental Mark IV engine, taking flight successfully on the 2nd of September 1942. Unfortunately, due to delays in production of the Mark IV engine, the order for 400 of these eventual Tempest 1s as they were to be known was cancelled. This led to the focus switching over to the installation of a Bristol Centaurus radial engine, in the Tempest Mark II design in particular, as adopted from the failed Hawker Tornado design, which was originally intended to replace the Hawker Hurricane. The enlarged fuselage of the Tempest was a perfect fit for the radial engine, and the installation technique owed a lot to a captured Focke-Wulf 190 Anton which landed in the British Isles a little while earlier, and it was used for reference to see exactly how the Bristol Centaurus could fit nicely. This meant that the first prototype, LA602, flew for the first time as of the 28th of June 1943, and the second prototype, LA607, flew for the first time on September 18th 1943. The initial test flights of both aircraft revealed two major problems with the plane. Number 1, large engine vibrations, and number 2, severe engine overheating. This combined with delays in production of the Bristol Centaurus engine to lead to the focus switching to the eventual Tempest Mark V. The Mark II, or Tempest 2, would only pick up once again and actually roll off the production line into combat service as of November 1945, which was too late for the plane to see service in World War II. A total of 474 Tempest 2s were produced, all featuring the 2,520 horsepower Bristol Centaurus Mark V or Mark VI 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. This engine provided the plane with a top speed of 442 miles per hour or 711 km per hour at an altitude of 4,600 metres or 15,100 feet, and an initial climb rate of 4,520 feet per minute, also known in metric as 23 metres per second. The plane was armed with four 20mm Hispano Mark V cannon, two to each wing, with the inboard cannon featuring 162 rounds per gun and the outboard cannon featuring 156. The plane was found to be superior to the Tempest Mark V in all but turn circle, and was only 20 pounds or 9 kilograms heavier than the Tempest Mark V, despite the much larger engine. 136 of the Tempest 2s were purely fighters, and the other 338 acted as fighter bombers, all able to carry up to 2,000 pounds of rocket or bomb ordnance. The plane would see service in post-war Germany, Hong Kong, India and Malaysia up to 1951, before eventually being retired. And so have our historical overview out of the way, let us take a look at how the Tempest 2 handles in War Thunder. For our first game of today, we're on the airfield domination map Colkin Gall using the following setup. Air target belts are our 20mm cannon, as these belts on paper are the most effective out of those available, combining two 20mm high explosive fragmentation incendiary rounds with two high explosive fragmentation semi-armour piercing incendiary rounds. The net effect is that any foe that crosses your line of fire will be cut apart very quickly within a 1 to 2 second burst, especially with the incredibly high fire rate of the Mark V cannon. To top this off, we are using a 500 metre gun convergence, which plays into our playstyle very well for the Tempest 2, i.e. keeping our speed up and keeping our distance from our opponents via a significant number of energy fighter tactics, where it be stall fighting or extended boom and zoom passes. For our fuel load, we are using a 30-minute fuel load to ensure that we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity alone, as per the norm. And we kickstart with an analysis of the climb rate of the Tempest 2. Focusing purely on props that you can face, the Tempest 2's climb rate up to an approximate altitude of 4,700 metres is as good as any other you will encounter. It will be able to surpass the likes of the majority of the planes you will face and equal those of the best planes in terms of their climb rates, i.e. the F-8F-1B Bearcat, the Focke-Wulf 190 Dora series aircraft and the Messerschmitt 109K4. As we push towards 4,100 metres altitude, however, and begin to level out, we're going to see something even more extraordinary and what is representative of the pure engine power behind this plane's radial engine. We levelled out at approximately 330 km an hour at 4,100 metres altitude. We are very gradually climbing and have not engaged war emergency power yet. We are already up to 430 km an hour by the time we begin to consider engaging our war emergency power. And as we do so, watch how our acceleration goes from very strong to stratospheric. We are now pushing above 500 km an hour and still gaining at the same rate, because we have not crossed our maximum altitude threshold yet, i.e. the recommended one in my personal experience and from the history of this plane, of approximately 4,700 metres. We now head towards an F-8F-1B Bearcat most likely, or at least a Bearcat of some description, and because of our pure acceleration on both WEP and without WEP, we're able to choose to stall fight with the Bearcat, although they do not take the bait here, rather than going for a simple head-on. This is the power of the Bristol Centaurus engine in action. You can choose how much speed you want to build up at any given point, so long as you do not take this plane above approximately 4,700 metres altitude, where the plane's performance in terms of its engine and overall handling begins to fade away gradually, and by the time you hit 6,000 metres altitude you will notice a significant difference in the plane's overall characteristics. But, having dived down in a short dive to try and chase the F-8F if they were still coming up, we've levelled out at approximately 4,600 metres and we now decide to go for an extended boom and zoom pass. And this is where once again we're going to see the brutish engine power and overall top speed of the Tempest 2 come hand in hand. We see a Mk-9, a very fast jet for the battle rating that we are at, and we are going to pursue it down. We're in a moderate dive here and we're gradually shallowing it as we head towards the Mk-9. We can see that we've now dropped below 880 km an hour, but we are still retaining our energy very well, and this means that we can come up behind the Mk-9 incredibly rapidly and just cut them to pieces at a distance of approximately 600 metres, bringing in the concept of our 500 metre gun convergence rather quickly. Here we retain our energy very well and begin to head over towards the Ka-84, and again we do not intend to go for a head-on. The Ka-84 is coming towards us and now we are going to break up into the clouds, seeing our energy retention at work, and this energy retention is on par with the likes of the Focke-Wulf 190D series fighters and even the TA-152H1. Unfortunately here, due to the cloud layer, we lose sight of the Ka-84 and they potentially lose sight of us. We can see a black dot over on the left and we believe it is them, but we decide not to pursue, but instead go for the Horton Ho 229 as we do not want to run the risk of being lured into a pack of enemy fighters on the other side of the cloud. We could have gone for the Ka-84, but we decided safety was the better option. And here, as we go into another dive once again, we can see how we would gradually catch up on the Horton, but unfortunately they have got the support of their teammates, so it was a bad call on our part, but now we can just level out and gradually chip away our own speed to evade the likes of an F-8F Bearcat once again, and even the Ka-84 that is gradually coming over from behind. We also have a Tempest coming from down low. We can see as our speed gradually fades away and our altitude is reconsolidated at a very slow rate, we are not bleeding our speed to the point where our foes can catch us. If anything, it causes them frustration. We cannot be caught in situations like this because we have so much speed available, and we are not even having to use war emergency power until we go back into our gradual climb to regain our altitude at a more significant rate. Again, we level out, and we can see now that our speed is going to start gradually building, even when we are building altitude at quite a nice rate. Here we are surveying the situation and emphasising the need to have patience. In the Tempest 2, the kills are not going to come as rapidly as they may in, say, a Griffin Spitfire, simply because you do not have the turn fighter capability or the all-roundedness that some planes at battle ratings of 5.7 and 6.0 can provide. Other examples being, say, the LA-9 and potentially the Ka-84. The Ka-84 Otsu, which I've not reviewed yet. As we break up into a climb then, enacting our patience, we can see once again how we're gradually heading towards our maximum altitude, and at the same time we're keeping an eye on the enemy Ka-84 and the Bearcat down below. They both seem to become interested in the friendly twin Mustang underneath us, and now we're going to dive after them. They will not be able to get away from us once we pounce on them, and we just need to make sure the Ka-84 is not going to try and surge up towards us in a sort of yo-yo dive. But here they do, and it is no bother. We've spotted it at an ample distance and we just go upwards. As even if the Ka-84 is stopped, they would have had a lot of energy on us, and we can just gradually stall out over the top of them and cause them to exhaust their ammunition, exhaust their energy, swing round gradually on our rudder, dodge the incoming fire, and cut them a cinder. And at this point we just carry our dive through and aim on a Messerschmitt 109. In doing so, we see that the 109 is coming up for a head-on, and has timed it to the point where we'll be able to get some grazing shots, but if we stayed in the head-on for too long, we could have been cut apart as well. And that brings us on to the concept of the fragility of the Tempest 2, its rather poor durability, in a brief moment. But as we loop around to hit the 109 once again, we get a critical hit on their rudder and decide to break off. We want to get the Bearcat as they are the more competitive fighter by comparison. We go into a brief head-on, but unfortunately once again the Bearcat responds in the same way, and we just do not want to get hit by their 20mm cannon or even their 12.7mm machine gun. The Messerschmitt 109 goes down into the ground, and as we break around on the Bearcat here, it comes around for another head-on. At the closer range we can see that our 500m gun convergence is costing us. We picked up a good hit on the Bearcat and they are crippled, but we did not enact the kill on them. And this is where, as we try to turn with the Bearcat by staying above them and using the combination of our rudder, ailerons and elevator all in one go, we can see how the Tempest 2 is not designed for moderate to low speed turn fighting. We could not get the drop on the Bearcat, and instead we had to pick up the assist. So that is a key point already that we have seen, and we should now come around to the durability of the Tempest 2 in the fact that it is very, very odd. This plane can sometimes take a significant amount of punishment, especially down the central fuselage. Around the engine, a number of 20mm shells have hit this aircraft before, and we have been able to walk away pretty much unhurt, although with slightly lessened engine performance, we must admit. However, if you direct the fire, in particular incendiary rounds from say a 12.7mm machine gun, towards the inner sections of the wings, i.e. heading towards where the wings meet with the central fuselage, there is a very high chance, if an incendiary round strikes this portion of the plane, that the plane will instantly catch fire, meaning that this plane is a very, very difficult plane to fly when pursuing enemy bombers such as B-17s, simply because they only need to hit you once in some circumstances to cause both wings just to burst into flames. And when the wings are on fire, it is rather unlikely that they will put themselves out, or at least in my experience. But that is why we are emphasising the need to avoid the direct head-on, as we cannot trust our durability to let us get away with things all the time, and we were quite fortunate not to take any damage whatsoever from the head-on with the Bearcat. We break up once again and emphasise how powerful our climb rate is in being able to position ourselves up at a higher altitude as we encroach upon the enemy spawn. But really we are reacting towards the Bearcat, which was climbing out of the spawn. And now, having said a number of things about the fact we're trying to pursue Bearcats, we have to open up and be honest. The F8F-1B Bearcat is your main competitor at your battle rating. It is, if anything, your ultimate equal, and a plane which trades some of its weaknesses for your strengths and vice versa. Here we go to stall fight with the F8F, using our superior engine power and our ability to retain energy after a small dive to ensure they will not be able to get a shot on us. We are reenacting what we did on the Ka-84A. As the Bearcat stalls out, we swing around, we line up our shot at a distance of approximately 500 metres, get the critical hit. As we get in closer, we use the spray of our ammunition at a closer distance to direct it towards the tail section and the wings and cut the Bearcat down. And we carry our momentum through in this dive to once again strike at the heart of the enemy over the airfield of sea. We see a Focke 190 Dora here, although they are converging into a melee with a friendly fighter and a couple of other enemy fighters, so we pick off the lone wolf at the back. another Messerschmitt 19 at G10. This enables us to pick up our ace in the day, and at this point we can snap away from the airfield at sea, and we should come on very quickly to one other item we can notice here, and that is the consistency of handling the Tempest 2. Our roll rate is moderate at best, especially by comparison with the likes of say the Focke-Wulf 190D series aircraft, or alternatively the Messerschmitt 19s, the F8F Bearcat, and the KI-84. But the difference is, when we go up to speeds in excess of say 700 or even 800 km an hour, as seen when chasing down the MiG-9 earlier, we do not have the roll rate lockups that those planes experience. And this means that we can essentially chase our opponents at very extreme angles, so long as we have the accuracy to preach and take the shots. Here we dive down on a Spitfire LF Mark 9, but unfortunately they go for another head-on and we have to bail out of the head-on at the last minute to be safe and ensure that we can stay alive. And this brings us full circle to the concept of the matchup against the F8F-1B Bearcat, whereby the Bearcat has the superior maneuverability by comparison to this plane by having the superior roll rate and superior turn circle. But the Tempest has the better engine performance and acceleration. This means essentially, so long as a Bearcat is not able to lure you into a turn fight, you will have the advantage so long as you do not go above 5,000 meters altitude, at which point the performance of your Bristol Centaurus engine becomes comparable to that of the Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine of the Bearcat. And this strikes a very nice dogfight in the sky, because sometimes you will find that you'll encounter a Bearcat up at the same altitude as yourself and you cannot escape that turn fight. And here, talking about cannot escape, we have a Messerschmitt 19 G2 Trop that has been baited up by us, and as we can see they are now in a lower energy state, so we use our retained energy from our initial stall out in order to break over the top of them. And as they gradually hang there and try to come up once again, we cut off throttle at a longer distance here by comparison with the Bearcat and pick the 109 apart for kill number 6 and our final one of the game. And this goes to show one other key item, the fact that we had to cut our engine very early with the Tempest 2 in order to be able to come around and get that shot on the G2. But we'll come back onto that in the next gameplay, as we can see that we have failed the mission. And it's now time for the post-game stats. With our 6 kills and single assist, we're able to pick up 27,169 silver lions and 3,676 research points. This was all due to us utilising the 3 core strengths of the Tempest Mark II. The first being the raw engine power of this plane, which A, enables us to outclimb or climb with the vast majority of the opposition we can face, excluding the later battle rating jet aircraft such as the MiG-9 and the F-80C Shooting Star. B, this also enables us to out-accelerate the vast majority of opponents we can face, or at least accelerate with them, from our stall speed of approximately 180 km an hour up to speeds in excess of 500 km an hour. We should also note that whilst we do not have high top speed by comparison with some of the planes we can face, such as the TA-152H1, we attain our top speed at a much lower altitude, which is more suited to the altitude ranges of this aircraft, i.e. 4,600 metres. Planes such as the TA-152H1 will attain their speeds at much higher altitudes, giving us a clear advantage. The second strength we played to was the concept of this plane being very consistent and powerful in a dive, being able to accelerate in a dive very rapidly up to speeds in excess of 800 km an hour and maintain its moderate roll rate. We saw this being put to good use in this game up against the MiG-9 and the Messerschmitt 19 G10 in particular. And the third strength which carries on from this is the concept of this plane being able to retain its energy phenomenally well when coming out in a dive, either to go back up into a zoom climb, alternatively just flying off in a straight line to escape opponents. We hold our speed very nicely and do not bleed it too quickly, meaning that we can take very risky dives against single opponents in the midst of a furball, alternatively just outside of the enemy spawn, as we're going to see in our second game towards the end, and break away without fear of retribution from the enemy team. And by combining these factors, we were able to come third by comparison to the rest of our team. And to very quickly conclude our point on the turn fight against the F8F-1B Bearcat, if you do end up in a turn fight with one of these planes, you can always use your raw engine power to kick the plane up into a spiral climb. whereby continually turning and applying your war emergency power, you can cause the F-8F Bearcat to stall out behind you, as it just does not have the engine power to match you in that climb. But anyway, let us move on to our second game for today and start to look at some of the weaker points of the Tempest 2 and how it compares against its predecessor, the Tempest Mark V. For our final game of today, we're on the ground strike map Merchant Fleet using the same setup as before, and once again we will be calling upon the long distance energy fighter style of play in order to succeed. We may summarise this style of play in a single word essentially, and that is Interceptor. And this is synonymous with the history we stated about the Hawker Tempest at the beginning of this video, where we said that the Hawker Tempest was designed as the replacement for the defunct Interceptor that was the Hawker Typhoon, especially at higher altitudes. Now some of you may be asking what exactly is an Interceptor in terms of a fighter aircraft. From my understanding, an Interceptor is a plane built around the concept of needing to get to altitude quickly and build up its speed rapidly once there. You will need a very powerful engine and an airframe designed around this to achieve this effect, whereby you'll be able to get up to altitude, build up your speed and bring down high value targets, typically heavy bombers. And here we're going to see an example in our shining Tempest Mark II against a B-29, a very powerful heavy bomber that needs to be brought down before it can attack our bases or ground units. So with that in mind, the role obviously confers a number of advantages to a given aircraft, and we outlined those advantages for the Tempest Mark II at the end of the first game. But if we flip the coin on its head, this also means that as we are designed for a single specific role, we have to make a lot of sacrifices to the overall performance characteristics of our plane in other regards. Primarily maneuverability, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and also the fact that we are going to put ourselves at a disadvantage if we ever allow our opponents to gain an altitude or an energy advantage over us. Because the Interceptor, if we extend it to all aircraft types, whether they be fighter or bomber, the Interceptor role requires us to pick off our opponents before they can become a threat, and thereby against enemy fighters get into a position of altitude and energy that is equal to or superior to our own. And we are now heading towards an enemy Spitfire LF Mark 9, which is exactly showing this, whereby they have the altitude advantage over us and therefore the energy advantage, and we have to make a situation happen where we are using a friendly Tempest as bait to cut down the LF Mark 9 before they can become a danger. We achieved this for our second kill, but this situation only occurred in this game because of the right time and the right place, and we noticed it. This is not representative of every single game you will be in with the Tempest Mark II, and this means that this plane can be considered to be rather situational. As we go to pretend a dive on the B-17, whereby we will break off very shortly because they are diving away as well, and we just want to build up a little bit more speed and try to see the situation over in the southwest corner of the map with the Bearcat and the B-17. The Tiger Cat is going to dispose of both, I believe. What does this mean exactly when we say it's a situational plane? Well, what this means is from one game to the next, you may not always find favour in the fact you are flying an Interceptor. In some games, such as the first game, we found that only a couple of the enemy fighter aircraft decided to go for altitude throughout the match, and this meant that we were always on hand to anticipate their movements, be able to get the altitude and energy advantage over the top of them, being able to convert our altitude into further kinetic energy whenever we wanted, and we could strike them without retaliation. Here we are seeing a number of friendly planes on our team all going for altitude and very few enemy aircraft going for altitude within the first half of the match, as we pick up our third kill on a Horton Ho 229. But in some circumstances not depicted today, you will end up in games where you are the only fighter on your team that goes for altitude at the start of the match. And whilst we did see this in the first game, the enemy team will send a large number of enemy fighters to all go for altitude to both to protect their bombers and secure the skies in terms of ripping apart your team's fighters. And this is an issue because whilst you can intercept one or two enemy fighters in isolation and bring them down very quickly, when you have a pack of 5 or 6, even if you manage to catch all 5 or 6 of them in a weak energy state, you only need one to bring its guns round onto you. Alternatively, you only need one to get into an equal energy position whilst you engage in the others. And once they have achieved this, you are going to fall victim to them in most cases, or you alternatively have to dive away, give up your position of altitude, using your brilliant dive speed and energy retention out of dive to zoom climb on the edge of the map, and try to re-engage at a time of their convenience rather than your convenience, because they will always be ready to counter you up in the higher altitude regions of the sky. And if you do encounter a Focke-Wulf 190 Dora that has been allowed to do this to the Tempest Mark II, you're in a very difficult situation, because if the dogfight goes up to higher and higher altitudes, i.e. 6,000 meters plus, you'll be susceptible to the superior engine performance of a plane such as the D12, the D9 or the D13 by comparison to the performance of your own plane. And here again, situation come into effect where you can bring apart a twin Mustang thanks to the fact our friendly Messerschmitt 109 was able to cause the Mustang to stall out. But when we say that this plane is situational, did we not see this with the Tempest Mark V when we originally reviewed it? Well, perhaps not as much, because we are now about to pursue a Tempest Mark V off to the edge of the map, and we are going to compare the two planes. The history behind the two planes of how they compared lines up very well with how they compare in War Thunder's arcade mode. The Tempest Mark II was the superior plane in most aspects, especially in terms of overall straight line performance and climb rate performance. It had the superior climb rate at all altitude regions, and it had the superior top speed. Alternatively, however, both planes had identical maneuverability on the whole, thanks to the fact that both planes share practically the same fuselage, with the same wing structure and the same tail structure. And despite the fact the Tempest Mark II was 20 pounds heavier, the only advantage this potentially occurred to the Tempest Mark V was the fact that the Tempest Mark V had the slightly tighter turn circle, and this is enacted in game as well, with the Tempest Mark V having the slightly more responsive elevator control, the weakest control you will find on the Tempest Mark II. And this means it takes a little bit longer for you to enact a horizontal turn, or alternatively try to pull out or change directionality in the midst of a dive quite sharply. Meanwhile on the Tempest Mark V this can be done with a little bit more aplomb. However, the rest of the control surfaces on the two planes match up exactly, with the roll rates of the two planes being identical and rather moderate, as stated in the first game, and the rudder performance of both planes being identical and moderate once again. Both planes are not built around the concept of turn fighting or maneuverability, but the high energy, high speed interceptor or energy fighter roles, with the Tempest Mark V holding a more middle ground position by comparison to the Tempest Mark II, which goes all the way in becoming that interceptor fighter. Now, we made the mistake in pursuing the Tempest Mark V where we opened fire at a distance of 1.3 km with our 20mm cannon. The longest effective range in my experience with these cannon at a 500m gun convergence is approximately 1 km, and if we had not opened fire and caused drag to our aircraft, we would have been able to catch the Tempest just as the rebound occurred, and we would have been able to bring them down just now, in my personal opinion. And this shows the speed advantage of the Tempest Mark II over the Tempest, and we will not necessarily be using war emergency power to even catch them, which again is a noticeable positive for the Mark II. Here we are just staying up at higher altitude and getting ready to counter the Tempest should they decide to go for an energy yo-yo, i.e. diving down and then swinging back up towards us with a lot of speed to try and enact a head-on or catch us by surprise. Again, we can see a friendly Tempest and BF-109 on our team both holding the altitude ground for us, and this is a situation which is nice to have and will not always happen. But as our friendly Tempest dives after the enemy Tempest Mark V, this causes the Tempest to dive down and snap up towards us, and we enact a head-on. And we'll show here that you can use the Tempest Mark II in a long distance head-on to rip apart a foe, as we cut apart the Tempest Mark V and pick up our ace in a day. We sometimes have to play in those dangerous situations and open fire at the longer distances to prevent our rather unreliable durability coming into play. And here we dive down over the top of the enemy spawn as a new wave of enemy fighters all try to surge up towards higher altitude, and we pick apart the fringe fighter, which is another twin Mustang. Here we can see the weaker elevator control coming into effect. We would have liked to have been able to loop over the top and strike that KI-84, alternatively the P-51 or BF-109, but because our elevator is a little bit less responsive by comparison to the Tempest Mark V, or perhaps you would expect in an energy and stalling fighter, as a result we had to make a secondary half loop in order to pull the distance, keep ourselves safe, and then pick off another fringe fighter in the form of this Messerschmitt 109 G14, which gives us our 7th kill of the game. But in doing so, this just means you have to adjust your playstyle more, and remember to pull more distance on your foes when performing such loops in order to ensure that you can swing around and attack them once again. You will not be able to create tight loops, but much more expansive ones. And here we can see an enemy F4U-1C Corsair trying to spray towards us, and we are diving down on them gradually, having noticed an enemy Spitfire now trying to push towards an equal altitude and energy position of our own. We pick up what will be our 8th and final kill of this match, and we instantly react to the fact we now have a situation to hand where an enemy Spitfire is in an altitude position superior to our own. We probably have more kinetic energy having just come out of a slight dive, but we cannot afford to go into a situation where we'll be the equal of the Spitfire. We always want to be the superior. So instead we are just going to use our speed, maintained at approximately 600 km an hour here very nicely, in order to ensure the Spitfire can never gain ground on us, and we turn our attentions elsewhere. Seeing an enemy P-51, which is now about to be cut apart by a friendly Tempest, as we can see. Alternatively, the Tempest actually gets ripped apart by the P-51, and now the P-51 Mustang is going to come up towards us. But we will use our engine performance to stall them out as always, and here we act as the bait for a friendly Spitfire to come in on the right hand side of our screen and cut the P-51 to pieces. So, some of you may be wondering at this point, where exactly is the optimum speed range for the Tempest Mark II, because it seems to perform so consistently at all speeds well above its stall speed. Well, when we qualified earlier that the stall speed of this plane lies in the region of 180 km an hour, that is the case, but you can feel the effects of this plane heading towards its stall at up to speeds of 275 km an hour, which means you lose a good portion of your responsiveness in this plane well before you even get near the stall. And this means you need to keep your speed up as much as possible. And I would personally recommend for this aircraft keeping your speed always in the region of 450 to 650 km an hour before you go into any given engagement, and pushing above these speeds when you go into the midst of a dive, alternatively when you are really trying to chase an opponent, as we saw earlier with the Tempest Mark V. You never want to let your speed drop below 400 km an hour, because in doing so you lose the ability for this plane to command overall engine power in the sky and be able to choose when it wants to go against its foes rather than allow its foes to make that decision for it. We are flying along casually once again, seeing our friendlies cut apart more planes coming out of the enemy spawn and climbing straight away. And here we decide to see off the end of the game by diving down our Focke-Wulf 190. We will not be getting this kill. We've already stated that we have got a maximum number of kills for this match, but we're going to see one more time how heavy the elevator control is and how it's consistent in the midst of a dive, but also the fact we can dive across the front of the enemy spawn here and not have to worry about anyone chasing us, unlike in say the Tempest Mark V where this could have been the case, or other planes that are battle rated and tier. We can take more risky dives and actually not have to worry about people catching us. We see here we almost get the shot on the Focke-Wulf 190, but not enough to score the kill. And we have a P-51 Mustang that instantly starts to dive after us, but has to break away straight away as the game ends and they would not be able to catch us. And with that, let's just take a look at the post-game stats once more. With our 8 kills and a single assist, we're able to pick up 24,117 Silver Lions and 4,254 research points. To defeat the Tempest Mark II then, and conclude today's discussion, one has to take one of two approaches in my experience. The first is to be the one in the advantageous energy position as outlined throughout the duration of our second game today. If you're able to get a more consistent performer, such as a Messerschmitt 109K4 or an M1K2JA in terms of their engine, up to these altitudes and higher, the Tempest Mark II will dwindle in your wake, as its engine performance begins to degrade above 5,000 meters altitude quite noticeably. The alternative is to lure the Tempest Mark II into a turn fight at low to medium speed. As the Tempest Mark II does not have the greatest of maneuverability from the outset, only being able to manoeuvre with the likes of say the Focke-Wulf 190 D9 and D12 and the TA152 H1, and if the Tempest is on your tail at any point, all you need to do is make 1 or 2 tight turns and you can typically force the aircraft to overshoot, thanks to its marvellous energy retention and the fact that this plane picks up speed very quickly even in the shortest of dives or nose down positions which may be required to initiate a turn. Avoiding these 2 counters, we can see by comparison the rest of the team that we came third in our second game, and this was more of a situational game where we relied on our teammates as much as they probably relied on us in order to secure the higher altitude portions of the sky. But this should not detract from the very powerful interceptor that the Tempest Mark II is. And if you're wondering whether it is worth to fly this plane by comparison with having flown the Tempest Mark V, I definitely recommend it if you are looking for a thoroughbred interceptor fighter, one that detracts from the Tempest Mk in the maneuverability aspects and puts all of its money on having a very high top speed, great acceleration and great climb rate to shut down individual opponents before they can become a threat, whether they be fighter or bomber. And for anyone who underestimates the power of the Tempest Mk, I feel sorry for you, because you will eventually succumb to the roar of the Centaur. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies!